Hi, my name is Phoebe Sarason, and I'm so excited to be here with Andre Diniz, who is here to talk about his new book called Ripped in Two. And hi, Andre, how are you?
I am doing great. I'm fantastic, as good as I can be at a time like this, but I am happy about some things, worried about some other things concerning the world. But as far as the book, I am very excited, very happy, and happy that you're here.
I am too. I always love sharing a good conversation with you. We've shared so many.
I've lost count. I was counting at first when we met, and then I decided to not count
I,
anymore.
I know. Well, do you want to tell people how we met?
Yeah, Phoebe and I have met at the Groundlings, which, if you don't know what it is, you should. It is an amazing improvisational acting and sketch writing school, and it's been around since the 70s, and it's got some amazing comedians that have graduated from there, and we're both in that program, and we met each other, and just
We met in basic, the first class. You auditioned to get in, and I was so nervous. And I remember the first day looking across the circle when we were introducing ourselves, and I saw Andre's face, and I thought, that guy's funny,
yeah.
even before you said a word.
That guy's funny. He looks in the too. So that's great.
Your personality just really shines through in your face, and I was not let down. And
So I thought that you would be, I'm doing a series of 3 interviews. This interview is dead smack in the middle. It's number 2, the one that's being published, but released on Facebook and Instagram. But I thought, what better person to talk about, building characters and, the process of creating art and how does art fit into this world right now? And I thought, Phoebe, she's the right.
thank you for thinking of me, Andre. It is a crazy time. We're right in the middle of this insane pandemic, and we're quarantined, and things don't look too funny out there. And we really need each other. So it's great to connect this way.
Yeah. And then speaking, of course, of the pandemic, I mentioned this in the other interviews as well, but this is a slightly different context in each. I clearly could not, in any shape or form, foretell that, I would be releasing my first novel at a time like this in the world, but this is happening. And and there was this thinking of is this the right time? Is it not the right time? How do I measure that? How do I know? And I've always been, very mindful of the timing of things and how art impacts in various forms, impacts people all over the world. And, when I was looking at my own personal goal as a writer and how I want this to be, what my wish as an artist for this piece would be is that, I would, the characters travel through such a specific journey of self-discovery, of isolation, of not being understood, and trying to connect to people that are close but so far apart. And I just kind of, I want, if people are feeling in any shape or form that they are, losing their grip, or they know people who are, and continue to see these characters journey through it and fight for their sanity and their self-identity and so on. And if that helps, I think that is the intention of the goal.
It's interesting. The timing seems kind of strangely serendipitous when you're talking about, isolation and, your characters being separated, and just the way that what we're all feeling now. And, there's just such an appreciation for any chance that you can feel connected. And it's a weird time. We really need each other.
Yeah, it's, first, well, I was going to mention something concerning isolation. Well, I can do
Yeah.
that. The character mentions at some point in the novel, he says to his counterpart, he goes, I think one of our issues that we've had as a couple, and it might not be, this is not a quote that I'm giving word for,
Mhm.
but he says something in regards, one of our issues as a couple, I think, is that we never really invited friends into our energy together. It's always
Uh,
been us, the two of us.
mhm.
And so, and it's figuring that dynamic of like how to navigate another deep relationship in your life, but then expecting that relationship to fulfill every part of who you are and every part of what you need. It's kind of unrealistic, but it happens quite often. And so I think, and especially in a time like this where we're kind of like forced to stay home, right? Where whoever you're with, or if you're by yourself, expecting either yourself or whoever you're with to kind of fulfill everything
It's
that
impossible. It's to me, and it is. How do you explore that in your book? I mean, it sounds undoable,
yeah.
um, and something that a bright flame that can flare out quickly because you need oxygen and you need difference, and we're so multifaceted that
Oh, I should probably say a little bit of what the book is about in the context, and then you see.
absolutely, yeah. Go ahead, please.
So for me, so my little quick like elevator pitch, if we were in an
Mhm.
elevator going to the top floor, this is probably what I'd say. It would be something. So the name of the novel is Ripped in Two, and it's a paranormal drama, and it's about two souls that are wandering the deep forest in the state of Massachusetts in the United States, and they have passed a long time ago, and they find each other, they fall in love, but they have no connection to a higher power. So their plan is to enter the bodies of two people, who are Dana and Elijah, that they find it's two children that they hope to just kind of hide in there and not bother them and only help them without being visible. And just kind of when Dana and Elijah pass of hopefully old age, they intend to follow them to wherever souls go next. And their request that they have their own bodies and that they've only helped them the whole time and they want to live again and consummate their love. But the story follows them throughout the course of 25 years and the psychological breakdowns that anyone would have from having an invasive energy inside them,
Mhm.
and the psychology behind that is really what drives the story. Yeah. So yes, and the book comes.
So,
It is intended to be on pre-sale on Amazon on the 14th, and then
um,
out in
14th of April,
April.
right?
Yeah. Like
Okay, so that's next week.
yeah, it's in a few
Yeah,
days. And
that's coming.
and then a week after that, on April 21st, it's out and fully available. And you can either get a print copy or a digital copy wherever you're at. And
That's fantastic, Andre. I'm so excited and so proud of you. And I know that you have been working on this for a really long time, but I've known you for a few years. I know the last few months you were just almost hidden away
yeah,
working on your final draft of
I
this
have
book.
to, especially, I originally started as like a poet when I was younger, and then I wrote some music for some time, and then I ventured into short stories, and then I became a playwright for a number of years, and then writing wise now, I went into this novel, which is actually a series, which we'll talk about later in the interview. But and it just it takes a long time. It takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of drafts. But for me, I always felt when I'm writing a longer piece, if it's a play or a novel or something like that, or even if I have been in the past, directing something in the past, like a play or choreographing something, when it's like a longer piece, I have to really just kind of hide from the world. I have to just do kind of whatever day job I have, if I have one at the time, and I have to just kind of then go home or go to a studio and just do what I have to do, and I have to kind of just not see anyone, which is kind of like it's just keeps me focused to finish it, because otherwise it's everything else in the world is very distracting. So
And how long ago did you start it? Where were you? You know, you've had these many lives, so to speak, these many hats that you've worn. Where were you in your life when you started it?
So I was living in New York when I actually began the first draft of it. And I talk about, I'm going to talk about New York a little more with you, but in the other interviews I mentioned further, which here I'll just kind of get to it really quick. I originally had been tasked to do a movement piece, actually, years ago in college. And it was a 5-minute piece where I didn't have to speak, and kind of go off of a painting and just use that painting as inspiration. And then the last pose of the movement piece had to be the pose that the person was in the painting. And that painting is Madeline with the smoking flame, and it's a French painting. And in the very end of it, has a skull in her hand, and she's sitting in a chair. So I did a movement piece, and then I was also taking creative writing. So then I used that movement piece that I created. I was like, oh, I'll see if I can translate that into a short story. So I did that. And then that short story stayed with me for years. And then a couple of events in my life were very significant. And then I had an idea in 2012 to write a series of books, and starting with this one. And that short story just came back to me, and I said, that's what I need to explore. I'm going to start there because the characters I was thinking of just kind of fit with that short story, and I always thought it would be longer. And so that short story actually became the prologue for this novel.
That's so interesting that that it was something that it was triggered. So did you choose the painting? Were you assigned an image that you were supposed to look at that?
No, it went off, and we could choose whatever painting we wanted, as long as there was a person in the painting doing something. And so it could be from any time, and so I happened to, at the time, go to the library, because we did that back then. We went to the library, and I looked through a number of books, and then eventually I found this painting, which I believe it's actually at the LACMA now here in Los Angeles. I went to it just a couple of months ago, and I was like, oh my God, it's here. But at the time, I remember this painting was at the Met, and then now it's here. Actually, I'm not quite sure. Maybe it could be a copy, but I don't think so. It looks like the real one. It's here in the Los Angeles Museum of Modern Art.
I just have this image of that, the hand holding the skull and you reacting to it, and it turning into a movement piece, into a story. It feels like this seed that you encountered, like the right seed at the right moment, and you got it. It was, in improv, we get a suggestion out of the blue, and you're responding to it. You're bringing everything to that one suggestion. You're also having some kind of relationship with it.
Yeah. And you're creating, in the 3-ish minutes or so that you have for an improv scene in class. Sometimes they run a little longer, but you're creating kind of like a mini story. And I've even thought in class, sometimes we take notes in class of like things that worked for us in class, characters that we're building and how we're doing. Sometimes I go, that could be just that scene, like that could be a scene in the movie. Or if I took that and had to write, what happened 2 years before that moment, like, so for me, it was kind of like that too. It just kind of started as a suggestion, started as a scene. And then, I think an artist's job is connecting dots between things. And then there was a couple of like many events in my life, but there were a couple of bigger events in my life that are actually talked about in the afterword of this novel, which I'll save for that because I
Don't
think,
tell us.
yeah,
Surprise.
I think they're more significant once you've read the piece and then you see, what they are. But it was one of them happened in 1996, the other in 2006. And so it was like pulling those and a few other things, plus this painting, plus everything else to create this story. And actually one of the main one of the main characters in the novel is named Elijah, and he's a writer. And in Ripped in Two, he is studying at Columbia University. And what I did in the story is one of the things he's tasked is to write a short story based on a painting. So he picks the same painting I picked back in the day and writes a short story. And the short story pieces of it are actually in the novel. Like you actually see his process in one of the chapters. And so it's the same painting. And I thought it was a little shout outs to how it all began for me.
That's so interesting, Andre, because I think one of the things that you and I we connect in so many ways, but we are both artists coming from many disciplines. And I think that it's always interesting for me to see to think about like tying in the different disciplines and way that they're the way they manifest.
Yeah, we talk about how we're both, you're a painter, you're a sculptor, you're an all-around artist, and how all of those have helped you to get to the next art that you explore, right? All
the processing and the way that the way that an artist sees the world, where you are going through life and you have to take in the material and process it and turn it into something, to understand it, present it, recontextualize it. And so that it's just so interesting to think about you as, this person who is collecting these experiences with your talents and crafting them and, expressing it in this way in your novel.
Yeah, and I am, thank you. And I feel the same toward you. It's a love fest. Because, for me, I've always been attracted to art since I was, as long as I can remember. Just in general, to like literally, I consume everything. I consume dance and music and television and film and books and literally from like everywhere in the world and every decade. It matters to me.
Right.
So for me, I always see the value in all of that. Something just popped up here on Zoom telling me I was running out of time. I don't know, but we'll see.
We can start another session.
No, I still
ask you another question.
No, it still says we have a field time. Anyway, so
well, what I wanted to bookend with the beginning of how this was created, your book, and where you were in your life when you finished it, which was, deep into the program at the Groundlings, performing and creating and inventing characters and fleshing out your characters. And, it's such an incredible school, such great training. And so you were finishing up this book. The other side of it is, is going through so far, 2 years plus of the Groundlings. So how did that influence your pulling it all together?
Character pieces are always important to me, even if it's, we talked about this once, even if it's a painting with like a yellow square and that's all it is. That yellow square can be a character and can be doing something, and it can have wishes and wants, just like, SpongeBob, who's also like a yellow rectangle, can have wishes and wants. So it's, to me, like, character pieces have always been interesting to me. And so I've always approached, whether it's even writing a poem, like if there's a poem with like a character in it, to me, I know why that person is writing a poem and why those words were put on the page and what events happened to in that character's life to turn it into a poem.
Mhm.
Which then, to me, the same occurs when you're doing directing a play. Even if you're directing something, why are those characters doing what they're doing? It's not just that play, like fill in the rest of the blanks. And so
Mhm.
driven pieces have always been important to me. So when we got to the Groundlings, I was so happy to be involved in a place that always said character first. If your character is full enough, it's like a well-rounded person, the fact it's not what's happening, it's the fact that they even just exist and they're doing any given task is what's going to be interesting to people. So
And it's all relationships.
all
That's another thing that's driven home, that we are it's character driven, and it's all about relationships, no matter what.
Yeah, no matter what on stage. And if you don't take time, we talked about like what our process is. I know that, like, my process, I take those characters sometimes that we build in classes and I come home, and what it makes me look like I've lost my mind. But I come home, sometimes I take time to practice them, and I literally will be by myself in my apartment for 45 minutes just talking and imagining
Mhm.
people are with that character, having interactions. So I learn how that character will speak in different scenarios. I thought once, oh, if I were to do a dinner party and this character was in charge of it, who would he invite? And if they did come, what it would be like. And so I was like, all right, well, let's figure it out. I'm not going to actually have real people here, but I'll just imagine it. I have a good imagination. So I'll just do that. And so I did like a 45-minute dinner party with these people here. There was a lot of conflict and a lot of things happened, but it made me find out a lot about that person. And and the same thing in this novel, before I even wrote a single word, I wrote down pages and pages on who these people were. I thought, before the lead characters even interact with each other, who is she without him?
Mhm.
Who is he without her? And and who their ideal partner would be, or in crime, and so, and what would that person do to trigger them falling in love with each other or not? Like, so I knew the answers to a lot of their story before I even sat down. And sometimes when you start to sit down and construct it, things change as you go, because you know but it's good to have that map, and it's good to know how would they behave, because the way someone picks up a phone or deals with doing anything can inform how you should feel about them. And so for me, like, the editing process, like you said, I was secluded for the last few months. I was working in the final.
I couldn't get you out of the house.
No,
I was like,
yeah.
where's my friend?
And so it would be like, right now would have been a perfect time to like do that. But I was, and I'm so thankful that I've been at the Groundlings, because there they like preach a lot when you're doing sketch. Is this necessary in this
Mhm.
5-minute sketch? Can you take this out? Would this person behave this way? Would they really do this? Does it matter? Does it move the story forward? So for me, a lot of going back through this final edit of the book was thinking that way. Do I need this? Do I not need this? Does this person, would they really say this? Is this the right word for them to say? Would they even respond? Do they have to do any of it? Can they just skip it? And so it was really interesting to see the dynamic on how, does this feel manipulated in the story or not? Because I didn't want anything to feel that way.
Want it to sound and feel authentic. It's the thing that drives me most crazy when I'm reading a book, when it just feels like, come on, nobody would really say that, or it just sounds like like a character, like a made up kind of character.
And then, and in this, like I'm in the story, I'm dealing with like, ghosts or spirits that have been, that have passed for such a long amount of time. And in fact, those two, when I get to the part in the book where they are introduced, the two spirits I mentioned are in the woods of Massachusetts. They don't have any self-identity. They've forgotten, they've been dead for so long. They don't remember at all who they were. All they are these balls of energy that are attracted to each other. And as they circle around each other and they start to have feelings and remember what that's like, and then they start to like remember slowly who they were, and so you go through that process in the book with them. But yeah, so what does a ball of energy act like? What are the wishes and wants, and how does it fall in love? How does the thing that's just hovering there fall in love, or what are they attracted to? But I only knew the answers to those things for them, for those characters, because I knew what their life was, and what would trigger them to like live again per like, not literally but per se. It's telling me here, just so you know, that the meeting is about to end, so we might have to do this in a 2-part.
Okay.
So
okay.
We'll see if it actually ends, and if it does, we'll just do a new meeting.
Okay. All right, so we'll just continue, and then you'll let me know if it suddenly goes out. I wanted to ask you about some of your favorite funny people, your favorite comedic artists. I know it's sort of out of the blue in terms of you talking about this book, but it's not out of the blue to who you are and what you were saying, what forms you and what you've been attracted to through your life. So
it's been like a number of different artists, actors, comedians, or singers and writers throughout life, but to me, the ultimate is, like, without a doubt, is Lucille Ball. That if you don't know who she is, I mean, you should. I mean, she's got most.
This is the root of our friendship, because I grew up laying on my grandmother's floor, coloring and watching I Love Lucy every day, watching reruns. Yeah.
And I've seen all of I Love Lucy, and then she had the Lucy and Desi Comedy Hour. She had the Lucy Show, Here's Lucy, and then she had another come in the 80s. I mean, so much, and movies and so on. And I actually saw the other day in an episode of the Carol Burnett Show back in the 70s, Lucille Ball was a guest, and she was so good in it. And so, her physical. Hi, everybody. We are back.
We're back.
Kicked us out, so we had to just start it again. But it's fine. We were kind of a little past halfway through it anyway. But Phoebe had just asked me about some comedic influence as artists, and then I had mentioned that Lucille Ball was definitely at the top of my comedic influence. And for me, like, the reasons is because, she was such a character actress. She figured out that character of Lucy so well, and there were variations of it throughout time, but it was so specific, and it's like you kind of felt like you knew her, but you didn't really know her, and she was so interesting to look at because, I remember, and these are not quotes either, it's just what I remember from time. I remember seeing something where she was talking about, or someone was talking about working with her, saying how she was just so addicted in a good way to rehearsal. She would not get out of there until she felt it was perfect, because she was like, I'm meeting this person every time there's a new episode. And
that's so interesting.
Yeah, and she's like, I need to figure out how, you know, in a lot of the episodes were named Lucy is a, you know, a firefighter, Lucy does this, or Lucy goes there. It's like all about her doing something.
She's always scheming.
Yeah, it's always scheming, or people are scheming for, you know, sometimes they would flip it and they would be scheming, you know, toward at her. But the thing is, like, she was always, she's like, you know, the physical comedy comes from me knowing exactly what I'm doing and every single second of it. And you don't figure that out when you're on stage. She's like, you figure it out at rehearsal. It's away from everybody. Yeah. She's like, I know that I'm turning something, you know, the knob a certain way, and there's a thought process in Lucy's mind of why it's being turned that way. It's not just to be funny, it's because this is how her brain works. Her brain would do it this way. But in order for me to figure that out and then figure out the funny in it is, you know, you have to just rehearse. And she had apparently such great energy doing it that people supposedly didn't care that they were rehearsing for so long with her. But, you know, she had a few partners in crime throughout her life that were with her in all these shows that were so dedicated to her too. But to me, like,
that long line of, you know, the tradition of like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, and, you know, the people who were technical masters at their comedy and their physical comedy. And it was so precise and choreographed. When you see it, it didn't look that way, but when you stop and analyze it, every movement had a purpose.
Oh my gosh, I remember seeing an episode where she was doing, it's something that's classic. Like, she's like stomping on grapes, right? She's in Italy, she's stomping on grapes, and like, it's amazing. Yeah. And I remember seeing it, like, she goes into like a wrestling fight with this other woman who was like stomping grapes.
I remember.
Yeah, and so
her dress was like this, her hair was up.
Yeah, but I was watching it. I watched it, and then I went back and I was watching it and pausing it and like really looking at all in the expression on their faces and seeing like where she was pulling from, because literally that entire fight is choreographed and figured out, and it looks like they were doing so much, but in my opinion, only it looked like they actually weren't doing that much. They knew exactly what they were doing, and I could see them pulling from the right places in their body so that they wouldn't like hurt themselves. And literally every punch that's given or every hair pull, everything that's done is done in the exact like way you would imagine that particular character doing it. It's like, you know, if someone else was in that situation, they would have behaved differently, and only she behaves that way, because like nobody else, even if they got into a fight at that moment, they would have fought differently,
right? Different character.
Yeah, the way she receives things being thrown at her, I mean, it's just like so perfectly put together. But it's because of that, it's because how well she knows them. And that character also too came from like radio before, right? So she had already a number of years being with that character, but she was still always so interested in figuring out more and more about that person every time she was handed a new episode, you know?
And it's interesting because her physicality and her physical presentation with her red hair and her outfits, and, you know, that was such a huge part of the package.
Yeah. You know, the fact she made even fun of herself with the number of episodes they mentioned that her hair is dyed red, that it's not really red, or that, you know, she's not really this. I mean, she makes fun of that character too, and throughout the show. And so I like people like that. Like Robin Williams was like still is such a great influence. I mean, his range in comedy is just kind of insane.
It's unfathomable.
I mean, he can do like the Fisher King, and then do like Mrs. Doubtfire, and then do, you know, something else like Good Will Hunting, and then he's doing, I mean, and like even in Good Will Hunting, it's a dramatic piece, but he is, as the psychologist or psychiatrist in that film, he gives subtle comedic moments in it that are just so pressures. I mean, he was nominated for an Oscar for it. And so I just also always appreciated his devotion to like not just being funny, but like figuring out exactly why those characters were using humor in order to communicate. So it wasn't like I'm being stupid as Mrs. Doubtfire right now. Yes, it's in the script, but to him it was always important to figure out why is she doing that exactly, and why is she hiding behind the humor, you know? And I mean, it's been talked about a number of times how comedians sometimes, people who are funny, sometimes use humor to as a mask or as something to protect themselves, you know. And I found out, yeah, I found out since I was little with my family, even that if I acted silly, like I got attention, or if I said something funny, people liked me, or if you know, I could like, you know, it was kind of like a mask or in some way. And we have many masks, right? So, but usually in a lot of comedians' lives, behind that mask, there's a lot of like drama. and so for me, it was interesting enough, you know, about his life, which, you know, ended tragically. He always suffered with depression. And Lucille Ball too had so many issues also too in her personal life, but how they were able to still grab all of that and
well, one of the things that I'm hearing,
comedy and art, and to me it was like I thought it's just they were both gifts from given to us.
there's so, I mean, obviously there's so many people who have sadness in their life, tragedy, or you know, personal pain, but what's fortunate for the artist is when it converges, when they find a way that works to get them through it, how they can, you know, sort of the alchemy of turning something ugly into gold, something beautiful. And what I know about you, in addition to like what you're talking about with the people you admire and your process, you have such a dedication to your craft. You're really like you enjoy kind of the choreography of putting things together and like mapping it out and understanding and the preparation, you know, all the hard work that goes into it.
It's a puzzle, and I enjoy figuring out the puzzle. And weirdly enough, I actually don't enjoy real puzzles in life. I don't. But these are the kind of puzzles I do like, because I can never finish them. And so like the real life ones, but these I can. I somehow, when it has to do with like behavior, you know, actually like I was gonna say my eye is always watching, and it's another big influence. She's not a comedic genius in any shape or form. She is funny sometimes to my taste, but you know, talking about another artist that is not you know, a comedic a singer-songwriter and dancer. Madonna for me has always been such a big influence. It still is to this day. You know, and I know I've like looked into her life as much as possible and watched as much as I can and read as much as I can about it, because you know, she just affected so much of the world in her like back in the day, for sure. Still to this day, you know, a lot of her fans are so devoted. But to me, what was I always really appreciated is actually how much art she consumes. She buys so much. She goes to so many shows. She, you know, art shows. She goes to so many dance performances. She like sees as much as she can. And I remember in one point in time her saying something in regards that her eye is always open, always paying attention to the behavior and the art that is around her. You know,
well,
so
Hannah. Sorry, I cut you off. Excuse me.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I heard part of her genius is she's so tapped into the culture, and she's able to process it and turn it into something that, you know, that she sees it and puts it out that is like delightfully consumable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I know that her background initially, she was a dancer, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, she sings well. She's not like a genius singer, but there's something that she does that she can communicate. Like she takes her whole tool bag and just turns that, you know, into something really special.
You know, especially if you dig into the YouTube land and just kind of like look at older interviews from like the 80s and early 90s that she has, and
Mm-hmm.
you actually bother to sit through the whole thing and watch it. You know, she talks about even the Like a Prayer album. She was like, you know, whenever I'm writing something, she's like, I just don't put out an album. She's like, I sit for a long time and I try to figure out what is it that I want to have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Not what is it that people want me to say or what I think I should say. What is it that I actually must like have to say? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to just kind of sit with yourself for a while. And then, you know, I think one of the things I talked about in the other interviews that we had here was connecting the dots, right? And I think I mentioned
Right.
earlier. And I think she connects dots so well. She travels through life and like sees something here, sees something there, and then is able to like pull those things together, connect those dots, and like put it on stage. You know, the concert I just went to, I mean, it talked about so many different things in such a creative way. I mean, and you know, and so I think the amount, and it sometimes it's extremely successful, like the
Mm-hmm.
outcome of it, and sometimes not as great, but it doesn't always have to be great, you know? And so, but what I do appreciate is the process that she has and how the attention to detail to every single moment of everything she does. Um,
And her ability to use what she has, you know, to the nth degree.
yeah,
You
I
know,
mean,
because
it's
she's
never,
so, you want to watch her. You can't take your eyes
yeah,
off.
she's never claimed to be the best at anything she does. And
Right.
so, and so, so I appreciate that, but she just like grabs her best self and when she's in her element, when she's created something that she actually took up time to like, you know, cultivate, it's
Right.
beautiful to watch because you go, oh, I'm watching art, and whether or not it's the best piece of art I've ever seen, it's like honest from that artist, and I appreciate that artist, you know.
Oh yeah. And you
And
can
then,
feel.
like when it comes to like my favorite writer of all time, it's definitely Stephen King. When I was like a child, I think the
Mhm.
very first book I read was The Shining.
Uh,
As a child, I was very attracted to horror as a child, which concerned my parents for sure.
right.
But I did read that book when I was little. I don't even know the age. I must have been like 10 or something, and it like
Uh-huh.
terrified me, of course. But I read it anyway, and you know, his attention to behavior and to character. I mean, everything that he's written is so character driven. And because you care about them, then when the supernatural or anything comes in, it's almost like an afterthought. Sometimes you even forget that those things are supposed to be happening in the book because you're so
Mm-hmm.
involved with how they behave with each other. And in his case, I mean, he's one of the writers that's written the most, you know, like
Yeah.
he has so many novels, it's ridiculous. But not all of every single novel that he has is the best ever. It's like it's not. There's definitely better ones than others,
Yeah.
and but I do appreciate because every time I do read one, even if it doesn't turn out to be my favorite ever, I can see um, the artist's mind um, at work, and I can see, oh, look how he bothered to have this one moment in this novel, or how he bothered to say this about this person, or the choice of words he had here. Like they all were thought out. I don't think he just sits there and, you know, vomits them. I think he like looks at it and he clearly knows what he's doing. But so I appreciate that, and I appreciate that he also has never said that he's the best ever and that everything he's done is the best ever. So I'm always weary of artists who are like, this is gonna be amazing and it's great and you will love it. Like
It drives me
you know,
crazy. Yeah, this is really important. Like the thing that drives me crazy is like what I'm doing is really important. You know, and when people like really name that.
yeah.
And you know, some things are, some things aren't. It's you're spending time with somebody, and they're doing their best that they can do to share something with you, you know, and it's that human connection. Um, you know, like when I just had a moment when I was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art a few years ago, walking through the gallery of these artists that I've always loved, and I just felt wonderful chills. Like I got to be in a room with these people with their essence, you know, who they are as artists, kind of coming out and talking to me. You know, it's like because it's lasted through time. You know, you're sharing your essence, and I got to be with them, and that's what, you know, that's what we're doing, and that's what feels so. That's why art is so important, to have that connection and framing things, and you know, framing experiences. And you and I have talked about taking, you know, dark moments and sad things and the journeys that we've been on, and turning it into something else.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk to you about, you know, you've talked about themes of loss in your book, and, you know, before
Yeah, you know, there's
moving forward.
it's being a dramatic piece and dealing with paranormal and relationships. It lends itself to having like darker themes in it as well. And so there's definitely, you know, there's themes of like a past life, of dying, of mourning, and being separated for periods of time, and or suddenly energy's not working out together anymore, and traveling through that, which we all experience in some manner, right? And so, and then, you know, how do you write about that? It's like you have to tap into what you know, right? And so I have to take time to see like, oh, where have I had heartbreaks, and what happened, and I have to look at my faults in it too. So even in the situation when it did occur, I was like, it's their fault, and then like now I have to look at it, you know. But to me, I've always been interested to like when I'm writing something of of the path untraveled. So, you know, in a play, or even I should probably stick to this novel. You know, there's something about me taking a personal experience and going like, okay, I was gonna walk into this place, and then I got there in real life, and I just stood there and I didn't walk in.
Mm-hmm.
But what if I had walked in and dealt with it there and at that moment? What made me actually walk away and not deal with it right then and wait in real life a few more days to deal with it later? But what if I had done it then? What would have that gone, you know, been like? And sometimes you know, if a moment turned dark, I wonder, oh, how could that moment have turned, you know, light to light? What made that moment that sometimes wasn't even intended in real life to be dark become dark? And then how, you know, I wonder, how could it have stayed light? And so, and vice versa. And so for me, when I'm putting things together, of course they're based on, you know, real things that, of people or certain events or what I know. But I like to always kind of like change it up and add another layer of difficulty to it if necessary, and then figure out like the psychology of why things became dark or why things were light, and flip it and see how they would deal with them. It's almost like an experiment to me, which then teaches something about me to myself as well, and and then it kind of allows me to see how those characters would behave too in different scenarios. But
And is that going on, and is that's part of the analysis and your process? And you know, is that just going on mentally, or are you kind of working it out on the side, and then, you know, then you bring it in and
I mean, when it comes to writing, I'm so thankful that like theater is such a huge part of my life, and I was in, you know, still pursuing acting, but like first thing, worked as an actor for so many years. I think you mentioned Charlie Chaplin before, but Charlie Chaplin was the very first character I played on stage. And the very first play I did when I was 10 years old, I was Charlie Chaplin. And so I started right there having to research someone who was like so important, So I sometimes get up and I literally act things out, like in the prologue of this play. I don't mind saying it because the prologue is actually out as a teaser and so on. And I talked about it in another interview too. I mean, it starts with a woman missing her deceased husband so much that she goes to his grave, unearths him, and takes his skull back home because she thinks he's in there.
There's that skull. The skull.
Yeah. So literally that cover right there is where the book starts. And so, and I remember when this was a short story for that creative writing class that I mentioned earlier in the interview, I remember people are allowed to ask you questions. In that particular class I took, people were only allowed to ask you questions and you had to answer it as short as possible. And you weren't really allowed to speak when they were feedbacking your story and discussing your story. But the very first question that was asked to me was like, did your dad die and did your mom go to his grave and grab his skull and take it home? And I said, yes. Which, no, clearly didn't happen in real life. But I said, and then everybody started laughing. And I said, no, of course not, But
you only write true things.
Yes.
Everything is nonfiction.
But at that, by this time in my life, I had definitely experienced like the passing of important people in my life. And then, I mean, sometimes depending on the day and the time, you're like, it crosses your mind. You wish you could just like bring them back to life, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's amazing. Like 15 years will pass, and then suddenly that person crosses your mind again, and then and then you wonder, like, what would they have been like 15 years later? What would they have looked like now? And so I said, okay, what? To me, I have to get up and sometimes actually act out the emotions of what's happening or the physicality of what's going on. It's one of the tools I use in order to figure out what the behavior would be, which then, when it comes to like how I function when I'm creating characters for the Groundlings, it's kind of the same idea. I'm so used to getting up and like by myself acting things out to explore how it would work, that it, to me, like that's a huge part of my process, so by the time I sit down to actually write, I can sometimes, if I'm stuck in something and I don't know if that's working too, I just get up and I go, okay, let's get up and do this and see if someone would actually, if they were to sit down and the coffee would spill, would they actually do this character? Would they behave? Is this what they would do right after? And sometimes when you actually sit down and do it, you go, oh, no, this feels stupid. Like, this doesn't feel, they wouldn't do this. You know what I mean? So, but I actually have to get up and like do it a lot of times.
It sounds so fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the process is anything but fun. Occasionally, there's the emotional roller coaster, but every time you describe it, I wish I was like sitting at that table, like, oh, I want to be one of the characters. I'll help you. I'll have that coffee with you. I'll have that dinner party with you.
Yeah, we could. Let's do it. Why not? Well, not at this time. We can do a virtual dinner party. No, it is fun. It's very rewarding. It's nerve-wracking, but yourself as an artist, how it's the process is, there's a lot of emotions. Sometimes you're overjoyed, sometimes you're pissed off, sometimes you're like over it. I mean, I don't want to also make it seem like, oh, every time I sat down and wrote this book, I was so happy. It was so much fun. There are days where I was like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And then like, you're like, walk away. But you just...
It's like diving for treasure every day.
Yeah.
And sometimes you run into a shark.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, you can't open the door in the sunken ship, and and then sometimes you find it and it's incredible. But it's the obsession that is so fertile and deep and exciting.
Yeah, there's a drive inside of us to communicate something, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's long format, sometimes short format, and whatever it is, if the drive persists there, it doesn't matter. It's like loving a person, right?
Mhm.
Person, I think by now I've lived long enough to know that like no, there's the friendships, deep connections that you go through everything with, like, not every single moment of always with that person, knowing them for 40 years or whatever is perfect, right? So
No.
but you learn to navigate it, and you learn to come back, and you learn to stick to them, and so it's kind of when something is being communicated between the two of you that matters all the time. And so it's like how I feel about these characters, especially because, you know, it's like a number of books. And so they're going to be around for a while with me.
Yeah. So you have more books in the works. You have another one coming that you're preparing. Tell me more. How many?
Oh, yeah. So I had this idea of what I'm calling the Torn Skin universe. I had this idea as I had an idea that I was going to write a series of 10 novels. And so here's hoping I can finish it. But I have them plotted, at least preliminarily plotted. And it's a group of people who are reincarnating. It's different lives, and they're dealing with different things, and what happens in limbo, what happens, where do you go after you pass in this particular world that I'm writing. And so and what they remember, what they don't, and the challenges of each specific life that they live, and the things you carry over to the next one. And so that's what I really wanted to explore. And with Torn Skin, I wanted to split the universe into like two, which is main cuts and side cuts. So the main cuts are the installments that are the actual 10 novels, the 10 main novels that deal with the main story and framework. And then the side cuts are artistic pieces that the characters in these novels talk about or create.
Mm-hmm.
So they become add-ons to the main novel. So for example, in Ripton 2, Elijah, one of the main characters, writes an anthology of poems and short stories called Variations in Time and Nature. And so that's what's coming out in October. So that actually becomes the side cut. I am working on right now on Variations of Time and Nature, which is like, in Ripton 2, Elijah, because he's a passionate writer, he talks to his partner Dana a lot about what he's writing about. Oh, I had an idea for a story that's like this and blah, 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 or this that happened to us, I could turn that into something. And, so whatever he talks about in Ripton 2, you actually get to see fleshed out and written out.
Wow.
In Variations of Time and Nature. And so poems that he writes to other characters in the novel and things that are all further explored there. So, I was talking to another friend of mine who draws, and in a further installment of the Torn Skin universe, there's someone who's a singer and a photographer and painter. And I was like, how amazing would it be to have the paintings that he creates actually to be out there, and to have a book that shows them. And so I was like, that's the idea. I thought it's something that hasn't been done, or I don't know why I haven't seen it. So, but yeah, whenever I've read something that people create something, there's like an artist of some kind in the book. I've always wondered, oh, I wish I could see that, or I wish I could hear that piece or that song that they wrote, or no, Shakespeare has so many of them too, right? Sometimes like I wonder, I just want to hear it, and so I thought, okay, well, let's do it. So whenever something calls for me in one of these main thing works, it's going that direction in the side cut eventually. Trust me, if I mentioned something in Ripped in Two, like Elijah wrote a novel, or there was like some photograph somewhere that is fictional, it's probably going to come out at some point in time.
Yeah.
And
Oh God.
it's a
Just
lot.
thinking about your brain just multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. It's amazing. It's amazing.
How hasn't it just exploded right now? I'm not sure. Sometimes it feels like it will, but it hasn't.
And so in this, in this time where everybody is sheltered and sequestered, and, we've talked about kind of the opposite of being so productive.
Yeah.
And the opposite, which is sometimes you need time to give yourself permission to stop and not have to produce. And everybody reacts differently, but maybe it's a time for being, just really being present, time for feeling, and just letting ourselves. It's a strange time because there's trauma everywhere, but you don't really, unless you're out there on the front lines,
Well, and there's also going to be, like, I think, psychological things we're all experiencing right now, and we haven't finished experiencing them. So it's like they're all there, and sometimes while you're living through it, it's really sometimes hard to understand what you're even living through. It's like I'm not quite sure what that is, right? So it's there's a lot of talk on social media, like, oh, this is the time to do this and to do that, to get this done and to get that done. But to be honest, there were days already since March 15th when we started the quarantine here in LA where I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm not doing it. Like, I have to literally take care of like my finances, or just like my mental health, or whatever, or I'm pissed at it. Like, allowing yourself to like feel what you're feeling, experience what you're feeling, and this is a time to do whatever it is you feel like you should do, and not what everybody else thinks you should do. If you want to sit down and write, do it. If you want to exercise, do it. If you want to feel sad, do it. If you want to feel happy, do it. It's like, you're not just going to do one thing in all of this time. You're going to do various things. And
every day has been, even though I'm just home, every day is surprisingly different.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like Groundhog Day, where I'm like,
you still try to be present, right?
Yeah.
To what's going on. And I think it's part of us. I think, if I'm talking about everybody as a whole, but if I'm like zooming in on writers, not writers, artists and writers, or whoever, actors, I think part of what we do is observe ourselves and observe everybody else. So this is a great time to observe ourselves, right? What is it
I'm
observing
myself watching this thing happening, but it's not a time of self-analysis at all.
No, and you might find yourself self-analyzing yourself at times, right? But it's a time to just be like, I am with myself, or with like another person, or what. It's like a time where you just have to kind of like live through this, and then the analyzing will be later, I guess, right? After it's done. But it's a time to be present still, because if you're not present, then you're missing in some way whatever. I know it's strange to say, whatever gift this time has to offer. There's always a gift in darkness. There's always something in there. Whatever gift this time has to offer, you might miss it because you're not present. So that's what I'm saying. If you're feeling upset, be upset. If you're depressed, be depressed for a minute. And then if you're happy the next day, be happy the next day. If you want to sit down and write a masterpiece, or if you want to make a funny video, if you want to make a video where you're complaining, or if you don't want to do anything, if you don't want to call anyone that day, all of it is fine. To do everything and to do nothing, it's all important and it's all fine. So I think that, yeah, I think it's a very interesting time. So that's what, and with that I say, read my book now or don't read my book now. What, you know what I mean?
When is it coming out, and how will people get it?
It's gonna be on Amazon exclusively for now. And it's on pre-sale on April 14th, and it comes out April 21st. And you can get a paperback version. You can also get a digital copy. And I think, also too, I wanted to bring up something that actually you and I discussed before we go.
Yes.
Which was something to do with like right now the coronavirus situation is like being compared to like 9/11 and other moments of history, and like how many lives were lost and how we coped. But what is so different about this time is that we're kind of secluded, having to deal with all of it. Like, even if you know someone who's passed,
yeah,
you can't really mourn together, or you can't really have like a celebration of their life or funeral. It's so strange, right? And so
it's part of the trauma.
Yeah, that we're figuring out how to navigate through, just put it lightly. And so, and there was this moment during I was in New York during 9/11. I was living there, and there was a moment of, a couple of months later, there was we were at a restaurant, and this guy who was friends with us at the time knew people who had perished in that terror attack. And he was at dinner with us. He was seeming fine, and suddenly he started bawling, and he just started talking about it. And none of us stopped him. It was clearly he needed to, and we were there for him. And in the end, we're thankful that he felt safe enough to do it, to talk about it with us. But what I found amazing is that he was a little bit loudly doing it, and nobody around us seemed bothered, because everybody was kind of in the same boat together in New York City at that time. And in fact, two people from the table next to us came up and gave him a hug, and they didn't know him. And so it was so interesting to be in New York at that time. My gosh, it brings tears to my eyes almost. But it's so interesting to be in New York at that time and experiencing that, and knowing, okay, what it's like to be able to come together physically, like body to body, to pat someone on the back, to give them a kiss, to hug them at a time of need. And then at this time,
yeah, we can't do it.
We can do that.
This is as good as it gets.
It's
this is what we get.
I mean, literally, I went to the grocery store the other day, and this woman, she must have had at least 12 feet of distance. And I'm not making this up in any shape or form. My friend was with me, we're at the store. She turned to everybody and yelled, "Everybody, get the F away from me. If anyone gets near me," and granted, everybody around her were wearing masks and gloves, right, but if anyone gets near me, I will punch them in the face.
From 6 feet away.
And she was so tiny. And everybody stopped, and everybody looked to see who she was talking to, because nobody was really
right
close to her. But I mean, and everybody just did it. But it's just that would have not been at all what you would have heard someone say during that time in 9/11, and in any other thing that I can think of. And so it's just interesting.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
At a time like this. Yeah.
When we take walks, because that's one of the things that we're doing to keep ourselves sane.
Yeah.
It's, especially in the beginning, when there was that odd feeling of walking around somebody, or you see somebody, you cross to the other side of the street, which normally is the rudest behavior that you can have. It's shunning someone or ostracizing them.
Yeah.
And then also some people we'll just like smile at them, you know, from across the street, and they'll like kind of grimace at you and put their heads down. It's like, you know, the days of like the witches in Salem or something. It just brings out very weird.
Can I even say hello to someone passing by? Is it okay to smile? Like,
Yeah, you can smile, and I'm not going to make you sick by
yeah.
smiling back at me.
Mm-hmm.
And then walking around with the face masks on, and, you know, like smiling at someone, but nobody knows that you're smiling because it's hidden.
Yeah. Because
But we know.
So it's definitely a time that is very unique, and a lot of things are going to come out of it later, good and bad.
Let's hope it's
A
more
lot of
good.
things coming out of it daily, or like every hour, right? Like we look it up and something else is happening or advancing one way or another. And so I was talking to friends earlier today who live in Italy, where it's being hit like tremendously, and they've been in quarantine longer than we have in the United States. And so it's just an all around crazy time. But you know,
It's the perfect time to read a book, though.
I mean, I think so. But it's that, you know, I've always been like, I read books, especially. I've always had this thing with books, like movies, because it's such more of like a time to like devote, like it's a longer devotional,
Yes.
like devoted time.
Yes.
I always like, I only read books when I am told to, or when I'm like, when it calls to me. So if you're like that person, when it calls to you, enjoy it. But yes, it is one of the things you can do when you're secluded, right? Read.
Yes.
I mean, usually we don't read in groups. Like sometimes we do, like book clubs. And I heard of someone the other day who was like, oh, I think I'm going to start a book club and like do a virtual thing about a book read. And I said, you know, it has already, those things exist already, but yeah, why not? You know? So I just think, again, my intent when writing it, I think, was very specific for me. And I know what it did to me to live with these characters. And I've had people who have read it. Of course, I've gotten feedback in the numerous drafts that I went through. And I know what they got from it. And so I know, and I mean this sincerely, that I think there are things that the characters experience in this story that are relevant emotionally and spiritually. And so if it calls to you right now to go through and journey through with them, then great. If it calls to you later on in time, the journey is there and is available to you.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading it, and I'm so proud of you. And it was really wonderful to hear about your process, and I can't wait for more.
Me neither. Thank you so much, Phoebe. You're a jewel, and I can't wait for us to one day be able to hug each other again.
You know, I just get up on stage again and do some improvising. I'm really missing it so much.
Thank you so much. And you guys also here, right on this post, there is Phoebe's website, her artist website is available for you to click in. I really recommend you click on it and you go and see all the wonderful things that Phoebe has been up to.
Paintings, drawings, videos, all kinds of stuff. And I love throwing stuff on Instagram every once in a while too. Show you what I'm up to.
So her Instagram is also here, so you should take a look, especially like comedic things and Groundlings characters who would, you know, she's been working on. Every now and then they pop up in there. They're lovely, beautiful to see. So go to it. Thank you so much, everybody, for sticking with out, and buy the book.
Buy the book.